Okay, so the Wall Street Journal had this interesting article, I thought, that described a little bit about how mortgages work in the United States. And it occurred to me that the complexity that goes into selling a mortgage to an individual is probably lost on most folks. And the idea that many folks live in a house that is a mortgaged suggests that many people touch this market without actually kind of understanding a lot of the intricacies of it. And the basic premise is that although you go to a bank or a mortgage originator like Quicken Loans to get a mortgage, they don't keep that loan. So they'll handle the transaction. So if I were to buy a house, let's say it's a $250,000 house, and I buy the house, Quicken Loans is going to wire the money through the bank directly to the seller of the home. I will sign some papers at the closing. Those papers then get FedExed back to Quicken Loans, let's say, or at the bank. They can do it in the office. That loan then is closed, and now I have an obligation to that originator. But they don't want to have their capital, which is they just gave to the person that sold their house. They don't want to have that tied up. They want to get that capital back out. So they don't keep much of the debt on their books, and instead what they do is they sell it on in a secondary market. And the biggest secondary market is hosted by the government in the form of Fannie and Freddie. And these are called mortgage bundlers. So they take the mortgages, they pull them all into a bundle. And so if I were, my mortgage might be lumped in with 200 or 300 other mortgages, hopefully from all over the country to sort of spread some of the geographic risk out, maybe even, I should say, several thousand maybe as well, to try to spread some of this geographic risk out and to try to spread out any risk associated with like this person being better credit risk than that person. If the auto industry in Detroit collapsed, you don't want a particular mortgage bundle being disproportionately exposed to that. I there When they bundle them up, they then sell them on into the broader market. So somebody buys all these mortgages back from like Quicken Mortgage and Merchants Bank and whoever else, and they put them in a big bucket. They then take that bucket and they break it into individual units. And each of those units represents kind of a bond. And the bond then gets sold on to somebody else. And those bonds might be sold to university endowments. They might be sold to big investment funds that handle pensions for large corporations. They might be sold to hedge funds. So they sell it into this sort of broad financial secondary market where large pots of money are looking for places to buy relatively stable paying bonds. It can't go out. I can't go out and buy the mortgage on my neighbor's house because most of them are packaged in with these different bonds. I, the neighbor, of course, can go out and repay his mortgage, but I can't. Like sometimes in old movies, you'll see people go off and say that they bought the note to so and so's house, and that's really very difficult to do anymore. The challenge, of course, is that the different stages of the loan get cut up and repackaged. So in addition to taking all these loans and slicing the collective debt up into small segments and then selling it on to other individuals, I'll actually take the string of payments that somebody might make over a 30-year note, a 30-year loan, and sell those. So the first 5 years of your mortgage you're much more likely to make those payments than the payments at the 20 and 25-year range. So consequently, they have different risk profiles. And I can cut up those different bits into what's called tranches. An early tranche on a pot of loans might be highly rated for risk, whereas the later tranches on a pot of loans might be very poorly rated for risk. And the risks is, one, default, which I think is the one most people tend to pay attention to. But the other risk that mortgage holders are exposed to is what's called payback risk. So the risk is that I'm going to give you money to go out and make this loan and buy a house, but when interest rates drop, you're going to pay that money back and borrow it again at a lower interest rate. So now the only time you're going to pay me back early is when interest rates are really low, which isn't exactly when I want to have a bond that's actually paying me a really good interest rate. So they're exposed to this payback risk, and that payback risk, it makes the later tranches in mortgages much more risky, and consequently they sell at different prices because I can break them up, which is fine. People typically, hopefully, will know how to price these things out, assuming they don't screw it up like they did in 2007 and 2008. All right, so it's complicated, right? I write a mortgage. That mortgage then gets sold off to a bundler. The bundler is normally Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are two government-sponsored entities. They operate in sort of this gray zone between the government and private practice. They are backed by the government in that the government will guarantee their debts. Fannie and Freddie, when they buy all these mortgages, in an effort to create this secondary market where people will buy up mortgages that they don't know the lenders themselves, and they don't really know much about the mortgages inside the bundle, Fannie and Freddie will attach a guarantee to them. So here's Fannie and Freddie, they buy all these mortgages, they sell them little bits of these mortgages off to people, and they say, we'll guarantee a certain portion of the value of this mortgage, and that creates a sweetener for people to buy it. So attaching a guarantee to every mortgage that goes out. When they're guaranteed like that, they're called agency mortgage securities, just to make it really, really complicated. What's weird about it then is currently, in an effort to keep the housing market alive right now, the Federal Reserve is buying up a bunch of those mortgage-backed securities. So Fannie and Freddie create the mortgage securities by buying up individual mortgages from banks. Those securities then are sold on to the Federal Reserve Bank, who is creating money to buy it. And the Federal Reserve can make money literally with a stroke of a pen. So you, as a trading bank with the Federal Reserve, have an account, and the Federal Reserve can just say, well, your account used to be 10, now it's 110. Congratulations. Oh, and by the way, give me some mortgage-backed securities in exchange for that $110. So I just increased your account, and I want you to go out and buy some mortgage-backed securities and give them back to me. Okay? So I literally make money. So right now, the mortgage market in the United States is doubly socialized. So socialized in the first case because the Federal Reserve creates the market for mortgages in the United States by guaranteeing their payments to a certain extent. The Federal Reserve, the federal government guarantees most mortgages in the United States, which is socialized housing. That's fine, but that's how it is. So literally almost all the mortgages in the country, those federally backed guaranteed mortgages are also now sold on to the Federal Reserve, who's buying them in an effort to keep the housing market going and to keep, mortgages moving around the country, as opposed to creating a housing crunch, which was a big killer in the 2007-2008 crisis. It's weird because it's doubly socialized. Part of the government is creating money to buy mortgages, which are guaranteed by this other part of the government right now. It's a little bit hard to figure out how we would get out of this sort of loop. We keep talking about getting them out. Many mortgages in the United States would not even be written without Fannie and Freddie sitting there buying all the mortgages. There is no real business case for why mortgages in the United States would be 30-year fixed interest rates without Fannie and Freddie sitting there making sure that that instrument is viable. Many countries around the world don't have 30-year fixed rates. They have essentially variable rate mortgages. Canada has got a weird hybrid of it's variable rate, but the rate resets every 10 years. But what that means is that people that buy the mortgage-backed securities are not exposed to this only downside of interest rates declining. They get no upside if interest rates go up. Instead, it functions much more like a normal bank loan where rates are variable. However, adjustable rate mortgages in the United States are not terribly popular. They're typically associated with people buying homes they probably can't afford because there's this big interest rate surprise if rates spike. All mortgages end up being adjustable rate mortgages in these other countries. Without Fannie and Freddie, we would probably be in the same boat. The government keeps talking about pulling Fannie and Freddie out of the mortgage market and letting them die out. It was a huge catastrophe when Fannie and Freddie stepped in, or government stepped in to back up Fannie and Freddie's debt in 2007. There was lots of navel gazing about the role of government, etc. What's sad is that this was a huge problem in 2007. Subsequent to that, through 2 presidential administrations and 12 years of government oversight, they still are in that market, and the reason they are is because it's a pretty profitable market for the government to be in good economic times. The problem, of course, is it's a small profit for a long period of time and then a big loss when the thing goes sideways, and that's what people are sort of paranoid about happening this time, although right now no indications are that that's happening.